Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant and watched the incoming transmission with cold eyes. The holographic display showed creatures from across the galaxy, all united in one single purpose. They wanted humanity dead. Admiral. Lisa Bennett moved beside him as the alien images filled the screen. 200 different species had come together, something that had never happened before in galactic history. The Zephyrians with their crystal skin, the massive Gorlak warriors, the floating energy beings called Nexari, and dozens of other races that humanity had met during their short time among the stars. Supreme Chancellor Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority as he spoke the words that would change everything. Humanity had committed crimes against the galactic order. They had expanded too fast, built too many warships, and refused to bow to coalition rule. Worst of all, they had dared to claim equal standing with races that had traveled space for thousands of years. The punishment was simple. Humanity had exactly 72 hours to surrender all military assets and submit to protective custody on designated prison worlds. If they refused, every human colony would be destroyed, every human ship turned to scrap, and Earth itself would be cracked open like an egg. Jake felt his jaw tighten as the transmission ended. Commander Ryan Torres stepped up beside him, his face grim as he ran through the numbers. The Coalition commanded 12,000 star destroyers, 47 different military technologies, and controlled 96% of known space. Humanity had managed to colonize 30 systems in their brief time among the stars, with a total fleet of 300 ships. The odds were not just bad. They were impossible. Back on Earth, President Katie Sullivan sat in the emergency session of the Global Defense Council. The room buzzed with urgent conversations as military leaders and politicians tried to process what they had just heard. General Paul Morgan stood at the massive display screen, pointing out coalition fleet positions with a laser pointer. The alien forces were already moving. Massive fleets gathered at jump points throughout coalition space, ready to sweep down on human worlds like a tidal wave of destruction. Each individual fleet was larger than humanity's entire military combined. Sullivan looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. Some showed fear, others anger, but all of them knew what was coming. Humanity had always been the newcomers in galactic politics. They had tried diplomacy, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. None of it had mattered. The older races saw humans as dangerous children who needed to be put in their place. Dr. Helen Carter sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. As head of the Human Research Division, she had been working on classified projects that even the president knew little about. The coalition thought they understood human technology because they had seen human ships in action. They had watched human weapons fire and human shields deflect energy blasts. They believed they knew everything about humanity's capabilities. They were wrong. General Morgan finished his briefing with the stark truth. In any conventional war, humanity would last perhaps 3 weeks. The coalition had superior numbers, better technology, and the advantage of fighting on familiar ground. Human colonies were scattered and poorly defended. Earth itself had strong planetary shields and orbital defense platforms, but they would not hold against the kind of firepower the coalition could bring to bear. The debate that followed was fierce but short. Some counselors argued for negotiation, for finding some middle ground that might save human lives. Others demanded immediate preparation for war, regardless of the odds. A few suggested that perhaps submission was the only way to ensure humanity's survival, even if it meant giving up their freedom. President Sullivan listened to every argument before calling for silence. She stood and looked around the room at the people who would decide humanity's fate. Her voice was calm, but carried steel underneath as she spoke. Humanity had come to the stars not as conquerors, but as explorers. They had built colonies to give, their children new worlds to call home. They had constructed warships not to threaten others, but to protect what they had built. Every step they had taken had been measured and careful, always trying to avoid conflict with the established powers. But now those same powers had declared humanity's very existence to be a crime. They demanded submission or extinction, offering no other choice. The coalition believed that because humanity was young and small, they would accept slavery rather than fight an unwinnable war. The vote was called. One by one, each member of the Global Defense Council cast their decision. When the count was finished, the result was unanimous. Humanity's answer to the coalition ultimatum would be clear and simple. They would not kneel. Sullivan turned to Dr. Carter and nodded. It was time to reveal Project Prometheus, the secret weapons program that had been developed in the deepest underground facilities on Earth. The coalition knew about human plasma cannons and fusion torpedoes, about gravity drives and energy shields. They had never seen what human scientists could create when they truly put their minds to the task. Jake Morrison received the orders from Earth while the Defiant hung in space near the outer colonies. His crew looked to him for guidance as reports came in of coalition fleets massing at the borders of human space. Some of the younger officers showed fear in their eyes, but the veterans remained calm. They had all volunteered to serve on the frontier, knowing that one day they might be called upon to defend humanity with their lives. The captain activated the ship's communication system and addressed his crew. He told them about the coalition, ultimatum, and Earth's response. He explained that in 72 hours, the largest military force in galactic history would descend upon human space with the goal of wiping them out completely. Then he told them something else. Humanity had weapons and technologies that the coalition had never seen. Dr. Carter's research teams had been working for years on projects that would surprise their enemies. The fight would be difficult and many good people would die, but humanity would not go quietly into the darkness. The crew of the Defiant listened in silence as their captain explained what was coming. When he finished, there was no panic, no despair, no calls for surrender. Instead, there was grim determination and cold anger. The coalition wanted to see what humans would do when cornered and facing extinction. They were about to find out. The coalition invasion began with the kind of overwhelming force that had conquered 100 worlds. Supreme Chancellor Vextar commanded the assault from his flagship, a massive vessel that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. Around him stretched the largest armada ever assembled, 12,000 ships of every size and design, all focused on one goal, the destruction of humanity. Their target was New Geneva, a frontier colony system that housed 3 million human civilians. Coalition strategists had chosen it carefully. The system was important enough that humanity would have to defend it, but isolated enough that human reinforcements would be limited. It would be the perfect place to demonstrate the futility of resistance. Vextar watched his tactical display with satisfaction as coalition forces jumped into the New Geneva system. The human colonists were already fleeing in civilian transports, their primitive ships struggling to reach the outer system before the shooting started. Soon there would be nothing left but debris, and the lesson would be clear to every human world. Then the human military arrived. Captain Jake Morrison brought the UES Defiant and 47 escort ships out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The human fleet looked pathetic compared to the coalition armada. Like minnows facing sharks, coalition commanders opened communication channels to offer one last chance at surrender, expecting the humans to see reason in the face of such overwhelming odds. Instead, Jake Morrison gave an order that surprised everyone listening. The human fleet began to retreat. Vextar felt a moment of confusion as he watched human ships turn away from New Geneva and accelerate toward the outer system. This was not the desperate last stand he had expected. Either the humans were more cowardly than intelligence reports suggested, or they were planning something. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Price had spent months developing new tactics for exactly this situation. Her studies of ancient human warfare had revealed strategies that no alien military had ever encountered. Coalition forces were trained to fight conventional battles between fleets of similar size and capability. They had never faced an enemy that refused to play by established rules. The human retreat drew the coalition fleet into pursuit formation. Vextar ordered his fastest ships to catch the fleeing humans while his main force followed behind. It was a classic hammer and anvil tactic that had worked against dozens of other species. The lead elements would pin the enemy in place while the main force arrived to deliver the killing blow. The Coalition vanguard caught up to the human fleet near the system's edge, where ancient asteroid fields provided cover and confusion. Human ships darted between the rocks like they knew every stone personally, while alien vessels struggled to maintain formation in the debris field. Coalition commanders began to feel the first hints of unease as their tactical displays became cluttered with sensor ghosts and false readings. Then the mines went off. Dr. Helen Carter's gravitic weapons had been deployed throughout the asteroid field weeks earlier, invisible to Coalition sensors and powerful enough to tear apart ships 10 times their size. The first explosions caught 3 Coalition cruisers completely by surprise, crushing their hulls like paper bags in the artificial gravity wells. More mines detonated as the Coalition vanguard pushed deeper into the field. Each explosion created gravitational anomalies that pulled other ships off course, sending them crashing into asteroids or each other. Within minutes, the orderly pursuit formation had become a chaotic mess of damaged vessels and confused crews. Admiral Tony Brooks chose that moment to spring his part of the trap. The Second Fleet had been hiding in the shadow of New Geneva's outer moon, their ships powered down and running silent. Now they came alive with weapons blazing, catching the Coalition forces from behind while they were still trying to deal with the minefield. Human ships were smaller and more maneuverable than their alien counterparts. They had been designed for speed and agility rather than brute force, built by engineers who understood that humanity would always be outnumbered in any major conflict. Now those design choices paid off as human vessels darted through the battle like deadly wasps. The UES Defiant led the attack, its plasma cannons tearing through Coalition shields that had been designed to stop different kinds of weapons entirely. Jake Morrison had studied every engagement between human and alien forces over the past 5 years, learning how Coalition defensive systems worked. Dr. Carter's weapons were specifically tuned to frequencies that Coalition shields could not deflect. Vexter watched his tactical display with growing horror as Coalition ships began exploding throughout the system. His forces outnumbered the humans by more than 20-1, but numbers meant nothing when his ships were trapped in a killing field that his enemy controlled completely. Emergency calls flooded the communication channels as Coalition captains reported hull breaches, system failures, and casualty counts that climbed by the minute. The battle became a massacre, but not the one the Coalition had planned. Human fighters swarmed around crippled alien vessels like predators finishing wounded prey. Coalition ships that tried to retreat found more mines waiting for them, while those that tried to fight back discovered that human weapons could penetrate their defenses with terrifying ease. Commander Ryan Torres coordinated the assault from his position aboard the Defiant, watching as years of careful planning came together in deadly harmony. Every Coalition ship type had been studied and analyzed. Every weakness had been cataloged and exploited. The aliens thought they were fighting primitive barbarians, but they were actually facing an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. Coalition forces that had entered New Geneva system with absolute confidence in their superiority were now fleeing in disorder, leaving behind wreckage and bodies that painted a very different picture. Of the 1,000 ships in the Coalition vanguard, fewer than 200 escaped. Human losses were 43 vessels. General Paul Morgan received the battle reports from his command center on Earth and allowed himself a small smile. The first phase had worked exactly as planned. Coalition commanders would be analyzing the defeat for weeks, trying to understand how their overwhelming advantage had turned into catastrophic failure. While they debated and investigated, humanity would be preparing the next surprise. President Katie Sullivan addressed the galaxy from the Oval Office, her image broadcast across every Coalition communication network. Her words were simple and direct. The Coalition had come to New Geneva expecting to find helpless victims. Instead, they had discovered that humans were more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The message was clear. If the Coalition wanted a war, humanity would give them one, but it would not be the quick and easy conquest that alien leaders had promised their people. Every human world would be defended. Every human ship would fight to the last. The galaxy had united against humanity, believing that numbers and superior technology would be enough. They were about to learn how wrong they had been. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Defiant as his ship patrolled the New Geneva system, now littered with Coalition wreckage. His crew worked quietly at their stations, running diagnostics on weapons systems and preparing for the next engagement. They all knew this was just the beginning. The Coalition would be back with more ships and better tactics, but humanity would be ready for them. Dr. Carter's laboratories were working around the clock on new weapons and defensive systems. Amy Price was training special forces teams for operations that would make Coalition commanders lose sleep. Admiral Brooks was coordinating the construction of new ship types that would give the aliens even more unpleasant surprises. The galaxy had wanted to see what humans would do when cornered and facing extinction. The Battle of New Geneva had given them their first glimpse of the answer. It was not surrender or desperate pleading for mercy. It was war fought with intelligence, creativity, and absolutely no regard for conventional tactics or fair play. The Coalition had made the mistake of thinking that because humanity was young and small, they would be easy to defeat. Now they were beginning to understand just how badly they had miscalculated. The humiliation at New Geneva turned Coalition pride into raw fury. Supreme Chancellor Vextar stood before the Galactic Council and declared that if humans wanted to fight like savage animals, they would be hunted like savage animals. The time for honorable warfare had ended. Coalition fleets split into hunting packs, each one large enough to destroy any human force they encountered. No longer would they mass their ships for single decisive battles. Instead, they would spread across human space like a plague, systematically destroying every colony, every outpost, every sign of human presence in the galaxy. The new strategy appeared to work perfectly. Human settlements began falling one after another as alien hunting packs descended without warning. Frontier colonies that had taken decades to build were reduced to smoking ruins in hours. Evacuation ships fled desperately toward Earth, carrying refugees and reports of unstoppable alien forces. Coalition media celebrated each victory with growing enthusiasm. The initial defeat at New Geneva was painted as a lucky ambush that had caught their forces off guard. Now that the Coalition was fighting seriously, human resistance was crumbling exactly as predicted. The primitive barbarians were finally learning their place in the galactic order. But Captain Jake Morrison and his crew aboard the UES Defiant were playing a very different game. While Coalition hunting packs destroyed visible human settlements, Commander Ryan Torres had been studying something far more valuable than any colony. He had been analyzing alien communication patterns. The Coalition's overconfidence had made them careless with their transmissions. Encrypted military communications were being broadcast openly, assuming that primitive human technology could never break sophisticated alien codes. Torres had been working with Earth's best cryptographers for months, slowly building a complete picture of enemy fleet movements and command structures. Every Coalition ship transmitted its position, status, and mission orders on a regular basis. Supply convoys reported their routes and cargo manifests. Command vessels coordinated their hunting packs with detailed tactical discussions. The aliens thought they were conducting secure military communications. In reality, they were giving humanity a complete blueprint of their entire war machine. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Price used this intelligence to launch operations that the Coalition never saw coming. Her special forces teams had been training for zero-gravity combat and stealth infiltration, while Coalition leaders debated strategy in their comfortable command centers. Now those teams began appearing where they were least expected. Human commandos materialized on Coalition supply ships during routine cargo transfers. They moved through alien vessels like ghosts, planting devices in critical systems before vanishing, without a trace. Coalition crews reported strange equipment malfunctions and unexplained power fluctuations, but security sweeps found nothing out of place. The devices Price's teams left behind were not bombs or weapons in any conventional sense. They were Dr. Helen Carter's latest creation, a nanovirus designed to feed on the specific metal alloys used in Coalition ship construction. Once introduced to a vessel's systems, the microscopic machines spread through the ship's structure like an infection. The virus was designed to work slowly and quietly. It would weaken hull integrity over weeks or months, creating stress fractures that would not become apparent until the ship underwent combat maneuvers or hyperspace jumps. To casual inspection, infected vessels appeared perfectly normal. Only, Detailed metallurgical analysis could detect the gradual degradation of their structural components. Coalition hunting packs continued their campaign of destruction, unaware that many of their own ships were slowly falling apart from the inside. The first mysterious failures began 3 weeks after the virus deployment started. A Gorlak destroyer suffered catastrophic hull breach during a routine patrol, its massive armored hull simply cracking open in the vacuum of space. Coalition investigators found no evidence of enemy action. The ship's logs showed normal operations right up to the moment of destruction. Sensor records revealed no human ships in the area. The official report classified the incident as a rare structural failure, possibly caused by metal fatigue or manufacturing defects. More ships began failing in similar ways. A Zephyrian cruiser broke apart during hyperspace entry. A Nexari assault carrier lost its entire forward section while changing course to intercept a human convoy. Coalition commanders started seeing reports of mysterious hull breaches and catastrophic system failures throughout their fleets. Admiral Lisa Bennett coordinated the intelligence operation from her command center on Luna Station. Her teams tracked every Coalition transmission, building detailed profiles of enemy ship movements and tactical patterns. The aliens thought they were hunting scattered human forces, but in reality they were walking into a trap that had been months in the making. The nanovirus spread through 60% of the Coalition fleet before anyone realized what was happening. Ships that had been infected weeks earlier began experiencing cascading structural failures during combat operations. Vessels that should have been invincible were falling apart under their own weapons fire. Jake Morrison received regular updates on the virus deployment as he patrolled human space with the Defiant. His official mission was to conduct reconnaissance and harassment operations against Coalition forces. His real job was to serve as bait, drawing enemy hunting packs into positions where Amy Price's teams could most easily infiltrate their ships. The psychological effect on Coalition forces was even more valuable than the physical damage. Enemy commanders began questioning their own equipment and crews. Ship captains started refusing high-stress maneuvers that might trigger hull failures. Morale plummeted as crews realized that their own vessels might kill them without warning. President Katie Sullivan monitored the operation from the White House Situation Room, watching as Coalition confidence slowly transformed into paranoia and fear. The aliens had expected to fight a quick war against primitive opponents. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that struck without warning from impossible positions. Dr. Carter's laboratories worked around the clock to develop new variants of the nanovirus, each one designed to target different alien technologies and materials. Coalition ships used hundreds of different alloy compositions, but human scientists were systematically analyzing and countering each one. Soon, no alien vessel would be safe from the invisible infection that was spreading through their fleets. General Paul Morgan coordinated the broader strategic deception that made the entire operation possible. While Coalition forces focused on hunting visible human targets, the real war was being fought in shadows and silence. Human special forces moved through enemy territory like deadly phantoms, leaving behind weapons that would not reveal themselves for weeks or months. The Coalition leadership finally began to understand what was happening. When their ship failure rates reached critical levels, entire fleets were reporting structural problems that made them combat ineffective. Investigation teams discovered traces of the nanovirus on dozens of infected vessels, but by then it was far too late to stop its spread. Vextar stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council and tried to explain how the most powerful military force in galactic history was being destroyed by an enemy they could barely detect. Coalition fleets were falling apart from within, while human forces remained largely intact and operational. The council members listened in growing horror as Vextar described the scope of the disaster. Thousands of Coalition ships were infected, with a weapon that turned their own hulls against them. Human infiltrators had penetrated the most secure military facilities in the galaxy without being detected. The quick victory that had been promised was turning into a nightmare of paranoia and mechanical failure. Jake Morrison received new orders as Coalition forces began their panicked fleet recall. Humanity had achieved something that no military strategist had thought possible: They had taken the most powerful armada in galactic history and turned it into a liability for its own side. Coalition commanders were more afraid of their own ships than they were of human weapons, but the war was far from over. The Coalition still had reserves and planetary defenses. They still controlled most of the galaxy and commanded resources that dwarfed anything humanity could field. The nanovirus had bought time and space for humanity to prepare, but the final confrontation was still coming. The galaxy had united against humanity, believing that superior numbers and technology would guarantee victory. Now they were learning that humans had weapons the Coalition had never imagined and tactics that no alien military could counter. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and the prey was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. Panic spread through Coalition command centers as ship failure reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Supreme Chancellor Vextar ordered an immediate fleet recall, but the damage was already catastrophic. More than half of the Coalition armada was either destroyed or too structurally compromised to engage in combat operations. The Galactic Council met in emergency session as member species realized that their guaranteed victory had become a disaster beyond imagination. The human nanovirus continued spreading through infected vessels, turning the Coalition's greatest strength into its most dangerous weakness. Ships that should have been defending their homeworlds were instead falling apart in the void of space. President Katie Sullivan chose that moment to address the galaxy directly. Her transmission bypassed all Coalition security protocols and appeared on every communication network simultaneously. The technology required for such a feat should have been impossible for primitive human systems, but there it was, proving once again that the Coalition had badly underestimated their opponents. Sullivan's message was broadcast from the Oval Office, her image appearing on alien screens across thousands of worlds. She spoke calmly and clearly, explaining that humanity had not started this war, but they were certainly going to finish it. The Coalition had demanded surrender or extinction. Now humanity was offering the same choice to their enemies. The terms were simple: immediate cessation of all hostilities against human forces, recognition of human sovereignty over their established territories, reparations for the colonies that had been destroyed during the initial Coalition attacks. Most importantly, formal acknowledgement that humanity was an equal member of the galactic community with all the rights and protections that such status provided. If the Coalition accepted these terms, the nanovirus would be neutralized and hostilities would end. If they refused, humanity would demonstrate just how much more dangerous they could become when truly motivated. The choice belonged to the Coalition leadership, but they had exactly 24 hours to decide. The Galactic Council erupted in chaos as species representatives argued over how to respond. Some demanded immediate acceptance of human terms, terrified that continued fighting would lead to even worse disasters. Others insisted that surrendering to a primitive species would destroy Coalition credibility and encourage other rebellions throughout their territory. Vextar listened to the debates with growing desperation. His military advisors had already informed him that conventional victory was no longer possible. Too many ships had been lost or compromised, and human forces remained largely intact. Worse yet, intelligence reports suggested that humanity had even more advanced weapons that they had not yet deployed. The Coalition's response was to unveil their ultimate weapon. The Starkiller had been held in reserve for the final phase of the war, a massive vessel capable of destroying entire planets with a single shot. If humanity wanted to play with advanced technology, they would learn what true power looked like when their homeworld was reduced to cosmic dust. The Starkiller emerged from its hidden construction facility in the Andromeda sector, a ship so large that it required its own escort fleet just to provide adequate crew and supplies. Coalition engineers had spent decades building the vessel, incorporating the most advanced destruction technologies from 47 different species. Nothing in known space could survive its primary weapon. Captain Jake Morrison received the emergency alert as the massive alien vessel began its journey toward Earth. Intelligence reports indicated that the Starkiller would arrive in the Sol system within 72 hours, well within the deadline Sullivan had given the Coalition. The aliens had chosen war over surrender, and now humanity would face its greatest test. Jake assembled every available human warship for a desperate defense of Earth. The combined fleet was impressive by human standards, but laughably small compared to the Starkiller and its escorts. Admiral Lisa Bennett arrived from Luna Station with the Second Fleet, while Admiral Tony Brooks brought his forces from the outer colonies. Even with every ship humanity could muster, they would be facing odds that made New Geneva look like a fair fight. Dr. Helen Carter worked frantically in her underground laboratories as the alien fleet approached. The Starkiller's shields were too powerful for conventional weapons to penetrate, and its hull was armored with materials that could withstand direct hits from stellar phenomena. Standard human tactics would be useless against such a target. But Carter had been developing something new during the months of secret warfare. Working with Commander Ryan Torres, she had created a quantum torpedo that operated on principles the Coalition had never encountered. Instead of trying to destroy the Starkiller's defenses, the weapon would simply bypass them entirely. The quantum torpedo could phase its target partially out of normal space-time, creating a dimensional shift that made conventional shields and armor irrelevant. The weapon was completely untested and required precise targeting to work correctly, but it represented humanity's only hope of stopping the Coalition's ultimate weapon. General Paul Morgan coordinated Earth's defenses as the Starkiller entered the outer solar system. Orbital defense platforms powered up their weapons while planetary shields reached maximum strength. Every human fighter pilot and gunship crew prepared for what might be humanity's final battle. The Starkiller emerged from hyperspace like a dark moon, its massive bulk blocking out stars as it approached Earth. Coalition commanders aboard the vessel were confident that this time there could be no human tricks or surprises. The ship's firepower was sufficient to crack planets, and its defenses could withstand anything in the human arsenal. Jake Morrison led the human fleet in a desperate charge against the alien supership. The Defiant and her escorts looked like gnats attacking a whale as they closed distance with the Starkiller. Coalition point defense systems opened fire, filling space with energy beams and explosive shells designed to swat away the tiny human vessels. Human ships darted and weaved through the defensive fire, their superior maneuverability keeping them alive long enough to reach attack range. But when they opened fire with everything they had, their weapons barely scratched the Starkiller's shields. The massive vessel continued its approach toward Earth, ignoring the human fleet like they were nothing more than a minor annoyance. Carter's quantum torpedo required a volunteer pilot, willing to make a suicide run directly into the Starkiller's main weapon array. The delivery system was too delicate to survive the kind of defensive fire the alien ship could generate, which meant the pilot would have to get close enough to guarantee a hit before their fighter was destroyed. Lieutenant Sam Parker volunteered for the mission without hesitation. The young pilot had lost his family when Coalition forces destroyed the colony at New Aberdeen, and he had been looking for a chance to make the aliens pay ever since. Now he would have the opportunity to save Earth itself, even if it cost him his life. Parker's fighter launched from the Defiant carrying the experimental weapon that represented humanity's last hope. He flew through the hell of Coalition defensive fire while Jake Morrison and the rest of the human fleet tried to draw attention away from his approach. Other pilots died protecting Parker's run, their ships exploding in brilliant flashes as alien weapons found their targets. The quantum torpedo struck the Starkiller's main reactor at the exact moment that Parker's fighter was vaporized by Coalition point defenses. For a moment nothing seemed to happen, and Jake Morrison felt his heart sink as he realized their ultimate weapon had failed. Then the Starkiller began to come apart from the inside. The quantum torpedo had phased the vessel's main reactor partially, out of normal spacetime, creating a dimensional instability that tore the ship apart at the molecular level. The Coalition's ultimate weapon collapsed in on itself like a dying star, its massive hull cracking and breaking as fundamental forces ran wild through its structure. The explosion was visible from Earth's surface as the Starkiller died in the void of space. Coalition escort ships fled in panic as debris from the massive vessel rained down around them. The weapon that was supposed to end humanity's resistance had become humanity's greatest victory. Jake Morrison watched the Star Killer's death from the bridge of the Defiant, his face grim despite the victory. Too many good people had died to make this moment possible, and the war was still not over. But for the first time since the Coalition ultimatum, he allowed himself to believe that humanity might actually survive. The galaxy had unleashed its most powerful weapon against Earth, confident that nothing could stand against such overwhelming force. Instead, they had watched their ultimate creation destroyed by an enemy they still did not fully understand. The Coalition's last hope was gone, and now they would have to face the consequences of their decision to reject humanity's terms. The yacht hunters had become the hunted, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans truly went to war. The destruction of the Star Killer sent shockwaves throughout Coalition space that had nothing to do with the massive explosion that consumed their ultimate weapon. For the first time in galactic history, an alliance of 200 species faced the possibility of total defeat at the hands of a single primitive race. Supreme Chancellor Vexitar stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council as reports flooded in from across Coalition territory. The nanovirus continued to spread through their remaining fleets, turning ships into death traps for their own crews. Human special forces had been detected on dozens of worlds, planting unknown devices in critical infrastructure. Most terrifying of all, humanity had demonstrated weapons that operated on principles Coalition science could not explain. The debate was brief and desperate. Species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia found themselves facing an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous with every passing day. The humans had started this conflict as the underdogs, outnumbered and outgunned by impossible odds. Now, they held the initiative while Coalition forces crumbled around them. President Katie Sullivan received the first peace overture exactly 24 hours after the Starkiller's destruction. The message came through diplomatic channels that the Coalition had claimed were reserved for civilized species only. Now those same channels carried desperate pleas for negotiation from beings who had recently demanded humanity's complete surrender. The initial offers were laughably inadequate. Coalition negotiators suggested a ceasefire in place, with both sides keeping their current territories and agreeing to avoid future conflicts. They spoke of mutual respect and shared galactic citizenship as if they had not recently tried to commit genocide against the human species. Sullivan rejected every proposal with growing amusement. The Coalition seemed to believe that humanity would simply forget about the ultimatum, the destroyed colonies, the millions of human civilians who had died during the initial attacks. They expected forgiveness and understanding from people they had tried to exterminate less than 6 months earlier. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral after his role in defending Earth, led the human delegation when Coalition representatives finally agreed to formal surrender negotiations. The meeting took place on a neutral space station that had previously hosted trade discussions and cultural exchanges. Now it would witness the most dramatic shift in galactic power that anyone could remember. The Coalition delegation consisted of senior officials from every member species, beings who had never expected to find themselves negotiating from a position of weakness. They sat across from a handful of humans who had somehow managed to bring the most powerful military alliance in galactic history to its knees. Admiral Lisa Bennett presented humanity's terms with clinical precision. The Coalition would immediately withdraw all military forces from human space and recognize full human sovereignty over their established territories. All restrictions on human expansion and colonization would be lifted permanently. Coalition members would provide full access to their advanced technologies and scientific databases. Most importantly, the Coalition would pay reparations for every human life lost and every colony destroyed during their attempted genocide. The payments would continue for 50 years, funded by taxes levied on every Coalition world. Humanity had been forced to fight for their very survival, and their enemies would compensate them for that necessity. The alien delegates listened in stunned silence as the full scope of their defeat became clear. These were not negotiated terms but dictated conditions from a victor to the vanquished. The humans were not asking for peace. They were demanding complete submission from species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. Vexitar tried to argue for more reasonable conditions, suggesting that both sides had made mistakes and should focus on building a better future together. Admiral Bennett cut him off with a look of cold contempt. The coalition had united 200 species for the specific purpose of exterminating humanity. There had been no mistakes, only calculated genocide that had failed. Dr. Helen Carter presented the technical details of humanity's victory to the assembled aliens. Her nanovirus had been specifically designed to be undetectable until activated, and she had already deployed new variants that could remain dormant for decades. Every coalition ship that had operated in human space during the war was potentially infected with weapons that could be triggered at any time. The psychological impact was devastating. Coalition leaders realized that their entire military was compromised, possibly permanently. Human technology had infiltrated their most secure installations and infected their most powerful weapons. They were no longer fighting an external enemy, but dealing with internal sabotage that could strike anywhere without warning. General Paul Morgan explained the broader strategic situation with brutal honesty. Humanity had spent months studying coalition military tactics, technological capabilities, and command structures. Human intelligence networks had penetrated every level of alien society, from military high command to civilian infrastructure. The coalition no longer had any secrets from their former prey. Commander Ryan Torres demonstrated this point by displaying real-time intelligence on coalition fleet movements, political discussions, and economic activities. Human surveillance systems were monitoring alien communications across the galaxy, giving humanity complete awareness of their former enemies' capabilities and intentions. The message was clear. The coalition could surrender now and accept human terms, or they could continue fighting and face complete destruction. Humanity had proven that they could destroy the most powerful weapons the aliens possessed. They had also proven that they could strike anywhere in coalition space without being detected. President Sullivan addressed the final session of the surrender negotiations from the White House, her image broadcast to every world in coalition space. She explained that humanity had never wanted this war, but they had proven more than capable of winning it. The choice now belonged to the coalition leadership. They could accept human terms and retain their civilizations under the new galactic order that humanity would establish, or they could continue their futile resistance and watch their worlds burn as human forces demonstrated just how much more dangerous they could become when truly motivated. The coalition surrender was signed 3 days later in a ceremony that marked the end of the old galactic order. Species that had dominated space for millennia now found themselves subject to human authority. The primitive barbarians had become the masters of the galaxy through superior tactics, advanced technology, and absolutely ruthless determination. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned UES Retribution, humanity's first planet-killer vessel, as it patrolled former coalition space. The massive ship incorporated the best technologies from 47 different species, all of them now working for humanity's benefit. Other ships of the same class were under construction, ensuring that the galaxy's new masters would never face a serious challenge again. Dr. Carter's research facilities worked around the clock to analyze captured alien technologies, not to copy them, but to improve them beyond anything the coalition had imagined possible. Human engineers took concepts that had remained unchanged for centuries and transformed them into weapons that their original creators could not comprehend. The colonies that the coalition had destroyed were rebuilt with technologies far superior to what they had originally possessed. Human expansion accelerated as new worlds opened to settlement, protected by fleets that combined the best aspects of every military tradition in known space. The galaxy that had united to destroy humanity now served to make them stronger. Jake Morrison completed his final log entry as he looked out at stars that had once belonged to humanity's enemies. The coalition had wanted to test human resolve and capability. They had demanded to know what would happen when humanity was cornered and facing extinction. They had united 200 species in the belief that overwhelming force would be sufficient to crush any resistance. The answer had been clear from the moment the first coalition ship exploded in the New Geneva minefield. Humans did not surrender when faced with impossible odds. They did not accept defeat when confronted with superior technology. They adapted, they learned, they improvised, and they won so completely that their enemies begged for the privilege of serving them. The galaxy had wanted to see what humans would do when cornered. Now they knew. Humans did not just fight back against overwhelming odds. They turned those odds into advantages and used their enemies' strength against them. They won wars that could not be won and made the impossible look easy. The coalition had made the fatal mistake of believing that because humanity was young and small, they would be weak and easily defeated. Instead, they discovered that youth meant adaptability, and small size meant mobility. They learned that desperation could inspire innovations that comfortable superiority could never match. The galaxy had united against humanity, believing that it would not be enough for the primitive newcomers to survive. They had been absolutely right. It had not been nearly enough. Humanity had not merely survived their trial by fire, they had emerged as the dominant species in known space.